Today on the What If Brigade, I'm going to be doing a response video to a video that Matt Easton made about short, choppy, one-handed swords. And in that video, he gave a lot of great reasons why he believes that he notices that these are found throughout the world. They're found in Japan, they're found in China, they're found in the Middle East, they're found in Europe, throughout a variety of time periods, and people keep coming back to these short, choppy, one-handed swords. And he invited us to say why we think these swords are so prevalent throughout the world. And if you haven't seen his video, I encourage you to watch it. It's great. He gave a lot of really excellent reasons. Some of the reasons that I completely agree with. Ease of carry. He talked about how it's kind of in our natural motion to chop. So if we forget our training, we might fall back to chopping. And that is a really excellent point. He talked about how they can be used at close range for wrestling. And it's a little harder to do that with a longer sword. And I agree with all those points. Here are some points that I wanted to add that I thought really makes sense for these short, choppy, one-handed swords, which, by the way, is one of my favorite kinds of swords. Really like them. And in terms of ease of carry, on the battlefield, I think ease of carry has a lot of applicability. The typical soldier is going to be carrying a spear, or maybe a polearm or a bow, depending on which army and which era. But in all of those cases, they want a sword that stays out of the way of that spear. It stays out of the way of the polearm. It stays out of the way of the bow. It needs to be really convenient. It needs to absolutely not interfere with that other weapon at all. And in all those cases, they're not particularly worried about having a really long-range sword because the other weapon covers the ranged attacks. They want a sword that is most useful for when that spear or that polearm is no longer useful, which means somebody is really in close. Like Matt discussed, they want something that you can use at more of a wrestling distance. So, you want a sword that stays out of the way of your primary weapon. And then, the other aspect of those short, choppy, one-handed swords is they pair great with history's other classic weapon, the shield. And here again, you can have a relatively small shield. I know this is a very big buckler, but big buckler, small shield. But you can have a relatively small shield that you carry with you and that you only use in certain situations. And you can pair that with that short, choppy sword, and it works great. Where if you have, yes, you can use a long sword one-handed. Yes, you could use a rapier. But again, those rapiers and those long swords, they're getting in the way of you using your spear or your bow or your polearm, which is your primary weapon. And so you want a sword that pairs well with a shield, but but doesn't interfere with your spear or your polearm or your bow. And those short, choppy swords, they pair great with shields. They work very well with that particular weapon combination. The other thing about battlefield combat is, it doesn't just happen on open fields. If you are in a castle, you probably don't want a montante, and you probably don't even want a spear, because the thing about a castle is whether you're storming it or whether you're defending it, there's going to be a whole lot of other people there. And even though castles have really high ceilings and some of the rooms in there are really spread out, these ancient castles wouldn't have been empty of things. They would have had furniture in them. They would have had lots of people going around. These giant rooms wouldn't have just been a giant empty space like you see today. That giant room was for something. They did stuff in there. So you couldn't necessarily just come in and swing your montante around, especially if there is 100 other people at that same castle, either trying to defend it or trying to attack it. you're going to want something that can be used inside. And I think kind of to blend into civilian contexts, but also in a battlefield context, many battles take place either you used a ship to get to the battlefield, or there is a battle at sea. And at sea, again, if you think about a hanger, you think about a cutlass, you think about typical weapons used aboard ship, you're going to want it to be relatively short. If you've ever been on a ship, the deck is covered with ropes and things, and there's tons of the mast is in your way. There's all kinds of things that are in your way all over the ship, and you want a short, handy weapon that is not going to get hung up in the rigging or slice into the gunwale or anything like that. You want a short, handy sword, and especially because most of the time you're not fighting on the ship, and so the sword needs to do its job by staying out of your way. And it doesn't matter if it's stored on a rack or it's on your belt, but especially if it's on your belt, the sword needs to stay out of your way while you're doing all of the activities that sailors need to do. These ancient sailing ships, it wasn't like one person was piloting it like a modern motor yacht. There was work to be done. They had to manipulate ropes and sails and do all kinds of tasks to make that ship do what they wanted it to do. And that meant really conveniently sized swords. And that's true whether it's a military ship or it's a civilian ship. And then to further go into the civilian context, I think if you are on a cart and you're bringing your goods to market and you're worried about bandits, you want a sword that is convenient for you to wear on the cart, for you to wear around town while you're selling your goods, or you could stow away if you're not supposed to have a sword out in the town. And you want to be able to get on and off of your cart with your sword, and you want to be able to use the sword while on the cart. And again, having a gigantic sword, a really long sword in that situation is not necessarily a good thing. You want something that you can wield while you're holding the reins, so you want it to be one-handed, and you want something that's not going to get in your way of your primary job, which is driving that cart. And so you don't necessarily want a really dedicated battlefield weapon, but you want something in case somebody tries to climb up your cart and grab the reins and steal your stuff. So and in that instance, you maybe poorly trained shopkeeper are probably going to want something where your chopping instinct goes really well. And so these are kind of all really about the ease of carry, the ease of use with other weapons, the ease of use in a variety of situations, inside buildings, aboard ships, while you're riding a cart. And for all these reasons, I think that short, choppy swords are really excellent and really shine in a whole bunch of situations where they don't have the longest reach, they don't have the most magnificent thrusting power and penetration, but yet they are still really, really useful. And I think Matt Easton talked about, a lot of these larger swords would be super useful in a one-on-one duel or specific situations like you're trying to take down a knight in armor, but not every situation is like that. And in a lot of contexts, in a lot of the contexts that I just explored, having a short, choppy sword is going to be much more useful than having a really long, unwieldy sword that doesn't really fit that particular situation. So these are my reasons why I think that short, choppy swords were prevalent in all these different countries and contexts and throughout history, is because they are really useful in these situations, and those situations were prevalent in all those countries and throughout all of those eras. So what do you think? What do you think the best advantages of short, choppy, one-handed swords are. Let me know. This has been the What If Brigade. Have a great day.